So I want you to picture a girl again, but this time she's 14 years old, tall for her age. This is not a picture of her when she's 14, by the way, but it's only one I have, besides the other one. But let's picture her. She's 14 years old. She's very tall for her age, thin, already wearing glasses. Her hair is dark and she wears it pulled back because she doesn't have the patience to fuss with it. I get it. She's sitting at the kitchen table of a house in Colorado in the autumn of 1929 and she's reading. I'm a reader too. Feel it. She's reading though because reading is the thing she does. She reads when her mother asks her to set the table. She reads when her father comes home for supper. She reads in church when she's supposed to be listening to the sermon. Again, relatable. She reads in school when she's supposed to be doing arithmetic. Again, relatable. She has two younger sisters, Dorothy, we've talked about before as her Dor, D-O-R, and a third we'll meet later. And they've stopped trying to get her attention when she has a book open because they know she will not hear them. Again, relatable. Outside in the world, the stock market has just crashed. But Edith, she doesn't know this yet because Edith is reading. The newspaper will arrive tomorrow. Her father will read it at the kitchen table over coffee. The depression will arrive in Colorado the way it arrived everywhere, slowly at first, then all at once. And Edith Roller, 14 years old, with the book in her lap and the glasses on her nose, will watch her entire childhood country contract around her. She will watch men line up for bread. She will watch farms fail. She will watch families she knows split up because the father has gone to look for work and the mother has gone home to her people and the children have been sent to whoever could just feed them. And she'll watch this and she'll remember it. And 40 years from now, when a man in a purple shirt stands up in a church in San Francisco and says, "The system is rigged against poor people and we are going to build something different." Edith Roller, 58 years old, with the same glasses and the same dark hair gone gray, is going to look up from her seat in the back of the room and she is going to believe him. Because she saw the system fail when she was 14. Because she had been waiting her whole life for someone to do something about it. And on a Sunday afternoon in 1975, in a church on Gary Boulevard, she is going to think that she has finally found the person who's going to. And as we know, Mama's going to be wrong. But it's going to take her 3 years to find out how wrong. And by then, she's going to be in a clearing in the jungle of South America in a top bunk in Cottage 48 with the mosquitoes eating good and that damn loudspeaker on. So, this is part 3. Who was Edith Roller? We're not going to Jonestown today. We're not going to gym. I can't stand him. We're not going to the boat. We're not going to the couch in Georgetown. We left Edith in a top bunk at Cottage 48 in the end of part 2, and we're leaving her there for one more episode because before we walk her through the 294 days she has left in that clearing, I have to do something else first. I have to make you love her. I know I keep saying this over and over again, but I don't know. Maybe not the way you already love her. Maybe I want to make it more than that. Maybe I have to make you love her as a whole woman and not as the woman just in the journal. Because the woman in the journal, she's 63 years old, right? And tired and committed and almost done. The woman in the journal is it's almost like the last 20% of her life. And I just think if all you ever know about Edith Roller is the last 20% of her, you're going to make the same mistake a lot of people make about someone who's joined it, which is you're probably going to think that the woman you met is the whole woman. Maybe you're going to think she was always this. Maybe you're going to think she was always headed there. Maybe you would think she was the type of person, like, oh, that's that type who would end up in that type of place. But I don't think she was. She was not. She was a whole woman. She was a kid in Colorado in the Depression, a college student in the 1930s, reading Marx for the first time. She was a young professional in Washington during the war. She was a foreign service officer in Karachi in the 1950s, in a sarai at a diplomatic dinner, shaking hands with a Pakistani general. She was a community college English professor in California in the 1960s, in a miniskirt probably, with strong opinions about Vietnam. She had boyfriends and lovers, and she had friends, and she had enemies in faculty meetings. She had students who adored her and students who hated her. She had a whole entire complicated 60-year human life before she ever walked through the doors of the People's Temple. And the cult does not get to be the headline of that life, in my opinion. The cult gets to be the final chapter. And that's all I kind of want the cult to get. So today, the cult does not get anything. Today, the cult is actually not an episode. Today is the first 60 days of Edith Roller, and I'm going to walk you through it the same way I walked you up the last time, slowly and in pieces, and with attention to what she ate, who she loved, what she read and how she thought, because that is the woman who walked into that church. And I feel like if I do my job by the end of this episode, when she walks in, I hope and pray you walk in with her, because I've been walking in with her. That maybe you'll sit in the pew next to her, feel what she felt, and gonna understand in your body, not just in your head, why a smart, educated, traveled, leftist, feminist, civil rights sympathizing 60-year-old woman chose this, because she did choose it. And we're not going to do her the disservice of pretending she didn't. So if you're here with me, get whatever you gotta get, your tea, whatever, settle in, because we about to go home to her home, Colorado. Now, I want to be honest with you about something before we go any further. The historical record on Edith Roller's early life is thin. Most of what we know about her comes from her own journal, which she started keeping in detail in July of 1975 when she was already in the People's Temple. And we have fragments before that. We have references in the journal to her childhood, her sisters, her education, and to her years in the Foreign Service. We have her resume in the archives. We have what her sister Dorothy and her friend Laura de la Fuente said about her after she died. We have her name on official documents. We have what she chose to tell people about herself, but we don't have is a biography. There's no book called The Life of Edith Roller sitting on a shelf somewhere. You know, nobody's written one. The world has not been interested. The world has been interested in Jim Jones, who has been the subject of approximately 1,000 books and documentaries, most of them which barely mention her. So, what I'm going to give you in this episode is partly reconstruction and partly inference. I can't speak right now, sorry. And partially the verifiable facts of her life if we have them. I'm going to tell you when I'm being careful with the guess, and I'm going to tell you when I'm being confident with the fact, okay? And I'm going to ask you to forgive the gaps, because the gaps are part of the story to me. The gaps are what happens to women like her. The gaps are what we owe her by admitting them. No more pretending the historical record on a 63-year-old woman is complete. It's not. Almost nobody's is. But now that I've said all this, here's what we do know. Florence Roller was born on December 26, 1915 in the state of Colorado. She was the oldest of the three sisters. Her sister Dorothy, who Edith called Dor her whole life, she was a couple years younger. Her third sister, who Edith called Eddie in her journal, was younger still. And the three of them stayed close for the entire of Edith's life. 62 years of sisterhood. That's beautiful, isn't it? When Edith was in Karachi, Pakistan, in the 50s, she wrote home to Dor and Eddie. When Edith was in San Francisco in the 1970s, she had Dor on the phone almost weekly. When Edith was finally on her way to Jonestown in January 1978, her two sisters drove to see her at Christmas and spent 10 days with her. 10 days. 8 months before she died. That's actually the last time her sisters ever saw her. And I want you to sit with the sisters for a second, because the sisters are the thing the cult could not take, right? Edith could give her money, her time, her independence. She could give her body in the end, but Edith never stopped loving her sisters, and her sisters never stopped loving her. And her sister, Dorothy, by the late 70s, was afraid for her and was right to be afraid and could not stop her and had to bury her. Dorothy outlived Edith. So did Eddie, as far as I can determine. Both sisters are still alive in the immediate aftermath of Jonestown. I don't know if there's pictures of them, but it just didn't feel appropriate to include those, to be honest with you, because they were not directly involved. So that's why they're not pictured. And that's why I did not even look to see if there was pictures for them. But both of them gave their statements, the sisters, to the FBI when the FBI came around asking what their sister was doing in a clearing in the jungle. And both of them helped in their own ways with the recovery of Edith's effects. And both of them carried her forever. There's no monument to Dorothy or Edie Roller anywhere on the internet, by the way, too. No website, no memorial. Just two American women who lost their big sister to a man they did not trust in a country they had never been to on a Saturday afternoon in November of 1978, who lived the rest of their lives with that fact in their kitchen. So just kind of hold the sisters for me if you would like. Edith's parents were educated for their time. I do not know their first names with certainty. I just know that they raised three girls who all went to college, which in the 1930s in Colorado, in the middle of the Depression, was not nothing. It was, in fact, quite a lot. It tells you the family valued education. It tells you the family had at least some money, or at least enough beliefs in education that they spent what they had on it. It tells you that the Roller Girls grew up in a house with books in it, and opinions about those books, and opinions about the world. And see, Edith was the bookish one. She was a smart one. She was the odd one, probably in the way very bookish girls in Colorado in 1925 are odd. And she wasn't known as the pretty or the popular one. She was not the one that boys lined up to dance with. She was the one with the book. Again, relatable. I used to like suck my thumb, okay, because I'm an adult thumb sucker, leave me alone. And some of y'all probably could like use a self-soothing tactic like sucking your thumb. Maybe some of y'all could, and maybe y'all would be better off in life. Just saying. But anyway, I would like suck my thumb and like put my head down and like have my book in my lap and like be reading my book, and it was like totally hype comfort for me because like I can't see anybody, see no evil, hear no evil, and I can just be in my own world in my book. So totally relatable to Edith. But she was the one with the book, and her family loved her for it. And the family also probably worried about it for her, you know, in the way that a family in the 1920s would worry about a smart girl who just didn't seem that interested in getting married. And she would never marry. Now, she did have relationships and partners. The journal just mentioned in passing men she had loved, men she'd lived with, men she'd broken up with, but she never married. She did not have children. She did not, by 60, have grandchildren to call, but she had sisters and friends and her books and her work and her politics. And that was the shape of her life. And she liked the shape of her life. And she was not lonely. And the cult did not catch her because she was lonely. And I just want to say that as cleanly as I can, that Edith Roller did not join the People's Temple because she was lonely. And I'm going to say that again, because I feel like there's a pop cultural model of who joins a cult, and it assumes that it's a lonely woman, right? But Edith Roller was not a lonely woman, no ma'am. And if you walk out of this episode with one thing, walk out with that, okay? The cult catches lonely women theory, I think, is a little bit of bad sociology, and it is worse history, and it lets the rest of us off the hook. The rest of us are not safe because we have spouses and children and book clubs. Y'all, I don't have I have a cat. I have a kid. No book club of me. Child, thank God, no spouse. But I have been married before. But thank God, no spouse no more. But the rest of us are vulnerable exactly in the places I feel like that we think we're strong is what I was getting at with there. And Edith was caught through her strengths and her intelligence and her political conviction and her desire to do good in the world through her belief that she was useful. You see, the cult walked in through her best parts, not her worst. And that is the part of the story that should scare you, not the lonely woman part. Lonely women, in my experience, I feel like can kind of probably sniff out a manipulator faster than anyone because they got practice, right? They've been hit on by bad men in bars since they were 19. Their radar is sharp. The people who get caught, I think, are the competent ones, the ones who think they're smarter than the room, the ones who think I would see it coming. As much as I love Edith, she thought she would see it coming. She didn't see it coming. So Edith went to college in the 1930s. And I want you to picture this. A young woman in the middle of the Depression in Colorado on a college campus, almost certainly the University of Colorado at Boulder, although I want to be careful about asserting that as a fact because I do not have like a way to personally verify her undergraduate institution. Maybe it was somewhere else. Maybe it was a smaller school. But either way, she was on a campus studying English or something like it. She was reading the great books in the way the 1930s American university taught you to read the great books, which meant the whole Western canon in chronological order with footnotes in the original language where possible. Way smarter than me. Mama was learning Latin, some French, some German, definitely Greek eventually, because in the 1930s, in American higher education, if you were a serious English major, you read Homer in Greek. And she was reading other things too, because the 1930s on an American college campus was not just the great books. The 1930s was Marx. This was the 1930s with the Communist Party, New Deal, labor organizing, and anti-fascism, the Spanish Civil War. And so for the 1930s on an American college campus, it was the single most politically radical decade in American higher education in the entire 20th century. And Edith Roller, 14 years old when it started, she would be 25-year old when it would end. She was basically the right age in the right place to be radicalized. And now I don't know how radicalized she got. I don't know if she joined the Communist Party or if she went to a wobbly meeting or a Socialist Workers Party rally or read the Daily Worker over breakfast. I don't have her like FBI file in front of me. I don't know if there's an FBI file. Although, y'all know what? There probably is, because by the time the McCarthy years rolled around in the 50s, the FBI had files on almost every educated American who had ever expressed a left of center political opinion in print. And Edith was almost certainly one of them, given where she ended up working. Because here's the next fact. Edith Roller worked for the United States Foreign Services in the 1950s in Karachi, Pakistan. And I kind of want you to sit for that for a second, because in the historiography of the People's Temple, when Edith is mentioned at all, she's only mentioned as a retired English professor. And I think that's kind of like the shorthand of it all, right? The resume line, what the books call her when they call her anything at all. Like, they only mention that. But the retired English professor line, when you really think about it, is the second half of her career. The first half of her career is a story almost nobody tells. The first half of her career is the United States Department, the American Embassy in Karachi in Pakistan in the 1950s during the Eisenhower administration, during the height of the Cold War, the Korean War aftermath, the partition refugee crises, the foundation of modern Pakistan. That's where she was. That's what she was doing. That is the first chapter of her professional adult life. And she got there as a single woman in her late 30s, unmarried, childless, educated, willing to take on an assignment overseas, which in the State Department in the 1950s was a particular kind of woman. You see, the State Department in the 1950s was actually full of single educated women who had gone overseas because there was no work for them at home that matched their education. And these are women who wanted to use their education. And places like Karachi and Tokyo were the places that would take them. So the State Department in the 1950s was full of these women. Almost none of their names are remembered, but she was one of them. I don't know exactly what she did in Karachi. I don't have her job description in front of me. I know it was some kind of administrative or cultural affairs work, because that's what single American women in their 30s were doing at American embassies in the 1950s. They were running libraries and running English language teaching programs and liaising with local universities and organizing receptions and writing reports. They were basically the backbone of cultural diplomacy during the early Cold War, and almost nobody has ever written a book about them. But Edith was one of them. She lived in Karachi. She probably had a Pakistani household staff in the way that American expatriates in Karachi in the 1950s had a household staff. She probably shopped in the bazaars. Bazaar. Did I say that right? Bazaar. The markets. Bazaars. She probably learned some Urdu. She probably wore Pakistani dress at some events and American dress at others. She probably dated. She probably had American friends at the embassy and Pakistani friends at the universities and British friends left over from the colonial era. She probably traveled. She almost certainly went to India, which was right next door, and she almost certainly had to have seen the Taj Mahal. And she wrote her sisters home about all of it. The Karachi years, when you really think about it, were probably the most like cosmopolitan period of her life. The Karachi years were probably when she became Edith. Like, when she went from the bookish girl from Colorado, becoming the woman who would 20 years later walk into the People's Temple, thinking that she had been around the world and seen enough to recognize a good thing when she saw one. And that is the heartbreaking part. She was right that she had seen enough. She had. She knew more about the world than 95% of the people in the People's Temple congregation. She had been to more countries, worked in government. She had seen actual diplomacy. She had seen actual humanitarian work in the form of post-partition refugees resettlement in Pakistan, which was one of the largest humanitarian crises of the 20th century. And she probably witnessed at least the tail end of it from her office in the embassy. So when Jim Jones in 1975 stands up in a church in San Francisco and talks about racial integration, global poverty, and the failures of American capitalism, Edith Roller, 60 years old, with the Karachi and the Foreign Service and the Depression and 30 years of leftist reading in her head, was not a naive person being conned by a smooth-talking preacher. She was an informed person making an evaluated judgment. She was the audience he was actually pitching for, and she bought it because the pitch was good and because the help was real, because the room was integrated in a way almost no room she had ever been in had been integrated, including the State Department, including universities, including the city of San Francisco, because the church was doing things, because the church had results. And we're going to get to those results in part 4. Let me not get ahead of myself. But for now, do a favor for me and just hold Karachi in your head. I've been asking you all to hold a lot in your head. So you can drop some stuff, okay? But just like, she's educated, well-traveled, politically experienced. That's the woman who walked into the church. Hold the resume of the person the cult caught. Because I feel like if it could catch her, it could catch you. That's kind of like the whole point, right? So Edith comes back to the United States in the late or early 1960s. I don't have the exact year. But the Karachi assignment eventually ended. So she came home and she had to figure out, Mama had to figure out what she had to do next. So what did she do? She went back to school. She did graduate work. She got a master's degree. She may have started a doctorate and not finished it. The historical record here is again thin. But what I can tell you is that by the middle of the 60s, Edith Roller was teaching English at the college level in California. And by the late 60s, she had connections at San Francisco State University, where her friend Laura de la Fuente either taught or worked or was finishing her own degree. I'm not entirely sure which. She was teaching at community colleges primarily, not at the 4-year flagship campuses, but community colleges. And I want to pause there because if you are a community college teacher right now, if you've been one, if you were taking class at one, you know what that means. In the 1960s, 1970s, community college teaching was very underpaid, overworked, undervalued labor, and it was done primarily by women, actually. And it was done primarily for working class students and first generation and immigrant students and vets that were returning and single mothers and people who could not afford or who could not get into the 4-year schools. So Edith Roller, with her master's degree and her Karachi years and her State Department resume and her reading of Marx, could have probably gotten a job at a 4-year university, but she didn't. She taught at community colleges. That's a choice, I think. And I think that was a political choice. I could be wrong, but I'm just saying, I think because I feel like she was teaching the students she thought needed the teaching. I feel like she was teaching the people who reminded her of the people she had grown up around in Colorado in the Depression. She was teaching the working class. And I think that tells you a lot about her. She lived in San Francisco, probably in a small apartment, probably with a lot of books, probably with a cat, although the journal does not mention the cat, so maybe I'm projecting. Like my cat just died actually, so it really sucks. Okay, I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna go there. Someone hit my cat by accident. I have like an outside cat, and someone hit her by accident, and she's been with me since I like. This is so personal, but I like it happened. I got like evicted from my apartment like years ago after my marriage ended and all this other stuff or whatever. And just I say all that to say this that like Bella has been here with me since like that, which is like was one of the hardest times of my life. So it just like sucks to have her gone. But sorry, projecting. Anyway, back to Miss Edith. So she had friends, she had sisters by mail and by phone. She had her work, she had her politics, which by the late 1960s in San Francisco were radicalized in a way that is hard for us to fully imagine in 2026 because San Francisco in the late 1960s was the radical capital of the United States. Mama watched the civil rights movement on television. She watched the Vietnam War on television. She watched King get killed. She watched Kennedy get killed. She watched the other kidney. She watched the Watts riots, the Kent State. She watched Stonewall. Eventually, although the country did not fully understand Stonewall till later, really, no, but she watched the Black Panthers, who were headquartered in Oakland, literally one BART stop away. She watched the anti-war movement in the streets outside her apartment. She watched the free speech movement at Berkeley across the bay. She watched Summer of Love, and she watched the Manson murders on the news in 1969, 3 months before she turned 54. And she watched the entire American counterculture rise and start to fall in real time from a community college department in San Francisco. And she was 50, and she was 55, and she was almost 60. You see what I'm getting at? She was not a hippie or a flower child. She was not at Woodstock. She was not a Panther. She was the generation older than all of those people, the Depression survivor generation, the old left, the labor movement left, the New Deal left. She was the political grandmother of the 1960s, not the political child of the 1960s. And the old left by 1970, they was tired, okay? The old left had been beaten down by McCarthy in the 50s. They had been disappointed by things in 1956. The old left had been confused by China in 1966. They had watched as movements be infiltrated, broken up, discredited. The old left had been told that they were naive, outdated, not radical enough by the new left, the campus left, the Black Power left, the women's liberation left, the gay liberation left, the old left. By 1970, they was almost alone. This was the old left. Edith was almost alone. And then in 1975, when she was 60 years old, a friend invited her to a service at a church on Gary Boulevard in San Francisco. And the church was called The People's Temple. And I think about it, the friend probably's like, Edith, homegirl, mama, babe, boo, you gotta see this place. It's fully integrated. We got black members, we got white members, we got old members, we got young members. We run care homes, drug program. We run a legal aid clinic. I have needed help with lawyers and have had no one able to help. Even legal aid told me no. Okay, I would have been at the People's Temple. I'm telling you right up, I would have been at People's Temple. But yeah, they're like, it runs a legal aid clinic, which is insane to me. But they're probably like, it has a leftist preacher who actually preaches socialism. It has been what we've been talking about for 40 years. It's the real thing. Edith Roller, 60 years old, politically homeless in a way she had probably not been since she was 15, gets on a bus, rides across town, walks into a church, sits in the back, and looks around. And I just want you to think about what she saw. Because she sees black and white people sitting next to each other in pews in 1975 in San Francisco, which sounds normal to us now, but in 1975 in American churches was almost unheard of. American churches in 1975 were the most segregated institutions in American life. Most of them still are. But she sees black people in leadership. She sees black women holding hands with old white women. She sees children of all races running around together. She sees the room she had been looking for her entire adult life. And then a man with dark hair and dark sunglasses gets up to the pulpit and he starts to preach. And what he preaches is integration and anti-capitalism and anti-fascism and the care for the elderly and the care for the addict, care for the prisoner, care for the child, and the failures of the American government, and the necessity of building something better with our own hands. And every single thing he said was something Edith had been thinking about for 40 years. And he was good at saying it. Electric even. He had the cadence of a preacher and the vocabulary of a leftist and the charisma of a movie star. And the room was on his feet and the room was crying and hugging each other. And Edith Roller, 60 years old, in the back row, was watching it happen and thinking, oh my God, I have found it. She had not found it. She found the man at the top of the pyramid we talked about in the structure of this series. And we're going to talk about him in detail. Maybe what part 7, I don't know. And I hope you hate him by the time we're there. Or hate him already. But on that Sunday in 1975, I did not hate him. Edith loved him, trusted him, believed him. Edith signed up. And so did thousands of other people who looked and felt just like her. And that's the part that I want you to hold. I told you at the top of this episode that one of the jobs of this hour was to introduce you to the other women in the temple who looked like Edith. Because if I let you walk out of here thinking Edith was the only educated white leftist in the room, I'm lying to you. She was not. The room was full of them. So when you listen to this story and we talk so much more in depth about Edith, just remember that parts of her are reflected throughout a lot of the members. Before we close out this episode, I want to give you 4 names. I'm not going to give you their whole stories. They will get their own moments in the series later. But I want you to meet them by name now, so that when they appear later, you already kind of know a little bit about. So first we have Carolyn Layton. White woman, Stanford educated, master's degree. She's a daughter of a Methodist minister. She was married to a man named Laurie Layton, also from a respected family, also educated. Carolyn was brilliant. Fluent in multiple languages, Carolyn could have done anything. She walked into People's Temple in the late 1960s, and she did not just join. She became one of the most powerful people in it. She became Jim Jones' mistress, and then she became the mother of his child, and then she became one of the architects of the entire Jonestown migration. And on November 18th, 1978, she died in the pavilion with her child in her arms. She was 33 years old. Carolyn was not lonely or stupid. Carolyn was Stanford. Carolyn is the terrifying example of what we're talking about. Caroline is an example that should scare you. And more. Any more. White woman, nurse, younger sister of Miss Carolyn Layton. They had different parents, but the Moore family was a whole religious family that they actually gave multiple daughters to their temple. So Annie, she was 24 years old when she died. And Annie was, by most accounts, one of the last people alive in the pavilion on November 18th. Annie is the person who wrote the final note that was actually found next to Jim Jones' body. She was educated, idealistic, dedicated, and possibly the most loyal temple member of her generation. Her parents John and Barbara Moore would later spend the rest of their lives writing and speaking about her, trying to make the world understand who their daughter was and what happened to her and what it means. The Moore family is the reason the Edith Roller journals exist in the first place, essentially because Rebecca Moore, Carolyn, and Annie's surviving sister, has been the central archivist of People's Temple history for 40 years. We're reading Edith's journal because of Rebecca Moore. So hold that name, Rebecca Moore. She's going to come up again. And also, of course, Dunn Beck for doing the work and transcribing everything. But we're talking about these women right now. Christine Miller, Black woman, older, 60 years old when she died, almost exactly Edith's age. Not in the educated white women category I've been talking about, but I'm putting her here because she is the Black equivalent of Edith in a way I want you to understand. You see, Christine had her own money. Baby, Christine had her own mink coat, okay? And she had her own car. She did not need the People's Temple to survive in the way, child, I would need the People's Temple to survive, okay? I'd be like, communal living, cheaper rent, sign me up. Y'all got me a job too, sign me up. Y'all give me food too, sign me up. Like, I would be down. I would work in it, be in it. I would have been in the People's Temple, but I would have been screwed over because I would have needed them. But Christine, however, did not join the People's Temple to survive. And a lot of the Black members, in a sense, and a lot of the white, like, just all over the board, did need the People's Temple to survive in a sense and had that infrastructure tied into the religion for them. But that was not Christine, okay? Christine joined because she believed in it. And Christine was, to the very last minute of her life, a thinking adult who made up her own decisions. And on November 18th, 1978, did y'all know Christine Miller was the only person in the pavilion who stood up and argued with Jim Jones about the order to drink the poison? She argued out loud, and it's on the tape, and you can hear it in her voice. She is the one who thinks that they should fly the babies to Russia instead. She is the one who says, I think there is something wrong with leaving the children behind to die. And she loses the argument. She drinks the poison. She dies anyway. But she argued. Christine Miller argued. And I want you to hold her name as carefully as you hold Eva's name, because Christine Miller is the Black female equally intelligent counterpart to Edith Roller. And they died on the same day. And neither of them are the lonely woman cult. And both of them deserve to be remembered as adults who made adult decisions in impossible circumstances. And one more, I don't have a picture, but it's a woman that I keep going in my own thinking about this. Her name is Laurie. I cannot pronounce her last name, most likely Efrein. But this is a book she wrote. That's all I could find for her. But she was in Edith's friend. She's the one who took Edith to dinner at the Hyatt Regency with her mother in the last week before Edith left for Guyana. You know, the one who kind of looked down and stuff. And we talked about she was Edith was basically invisible to a woman like her. But this is her daughter, that woman. Laurie, she was also a People's Temple member, and she was younger than Edith. And Laurie was educated. And Laurie is actually one of the people who survived because Laurie was not at Jonestown on November 18th. She was in San Francisco. She was, in fact, running the People's Temple San Francisco operations in the final weeks. Laurie watched her movement implode from the inside, and she spent the rest of her life trying to explain what happened. And she is one of the people who has helped historians like Rebecca Moore understand what was going on inside the inner circle. And I think that Laurie's kind of what survival looks like. Laurie is what Edith might have looked like if Edith had not gotten on the plane. And the difference between Laurie and Edith is not intelligence or commitment or political conviction. The difference is just the assignment. Laurie was assigned to stay, Edith was assigned to go. That's literally the difference. Random is that, cruel is that, final is that. So, 4 women. Carolyn, Annie, Christine, Laurie, plus Edith. Plus all the others I'm not naming tonight. That was a demographic profile of the People's Temple women who walked in for ideological reasons. They were not lonely or stupid or desperate. They were the most politically idealistic women of their generation, and they walked in with their eyes open, and they meant every bit of it. That is the lock. That is the door. If you can hold those 5 women in your head all at once, all real, all whole, then you can finally begin to understand what the People's Temple was. It was a gathering of idealists who got called by a man who had figured out how to read idealist. So Edith joined the People's Temple gradually. And I want to be careful with that word gradually because cults are not, in my experience and in the experience of the literature, things you join all at once. You don't walk into a church on a Sunday and sign over your life by Monday. No, you walk in on a Sunday and you come back the next Sunday and the next Sunday after that. And then you go to a weeknight class and then you volunteer for a project and then you start tithing and then you make a friend and you make 6 friends and then you start spending Saturdays at the church and then you quit all your other social activities and other people. And then your whole life is the church. And by the time you look up and realize your whole life is the church, you have been a member for 2 years and you can't remember what your life looked like before. That's how it works. That's how it worked for Edith. By the summer of 1975, when her journal begins, Edith had already been attending temple services for some time. The journal starts in July of 1975, and she was already deeply embedded. She was already going to multiple services per week, traveling on temple buses, donating money. She's already taking notes for Jim Jones at his request. And the journal entries from the summer and fall of 1975 that you can read on the SDSU archive page, she's already discussing going communal, moving into the temple-owned housing. She's already managing her relationship with her sister Dorothy through the lens of Dorothy's concerns about the church, which means Dorothy was already worried, which means Edith had already gone further than her family was comfortable with. And then by February of 1976, 6 months into the journal, Edith did go communal. She moved into a temple-owned apartment building at 1029 Gary in San Francisco, and she gave up her own apartment, and her sister Dorothy Child was not happy about it, but Edith did it anyway. And she kept her job at Betchel. Betchel was the giant engineering firm she worked at as an administrative secretary. She was there for years. She didn't quit Betchel until December of 1977, almost 2.5 years after the journal begins. And even though she only quit because she was about to leave for Guyana and could not work there basically from the jungle, Betchel was her outside life. It was like the last thing she gave up. She held onto her paycheck and her professional identity for as long as she possibly could, and she only let it go at the last possible minute, which tells you that she was not impulsive about this. That tells you that she did not sign over her life in some fugue state at a Sunday service. That tells you that she made the decision to fully commit over years in small increments with one foot in the church and one foot in the world until one day she made the final step and pulled the back foot in. And the reason she pulled the back foot in the end, was the help. The help. That is the word she would have used, the help, the work the temple was doing, the care homes, the drug program, the free clinic, the desegregation work, the legal aid, the college scholarships, the bus rides, the grocery distributions, all of it, the infrastructure of mercy that the temple had built in the Bay Area and that nobody else was building, and that served thousands of people, and that was, in her words, the most real thing she had ever been a part of. And she had been to Karachi, seen American diplomacy up close, taught at community colleges, watched the federal government underinvest in working class education for 20 years. She watched the war on poverty start and stall. She watched the civil rights movement win legal victories and then be abandoned. She watched the anti-war movement be infiltrated and broken. She watched, by 1976, every American institution she had ever believed in fail to deliver on its promises. And then she walked into a church on Gary Boulevard, and the church was delivering, feeding people, housing the elderly, getting people off heroin, putting kids through college, fighting evictions, actually being integrated. That was real. That was not a lie or a front. That was the actual work being done by the actual people in the actual building. And Edith Roller, 61 years old, watched it being done, and she signed up to help do it. And she did help do it. And she was useful, and she was loved, and she was home. And that's why she went to Guyana. She went to Guyana because the man at the top of the pyramid told the people doing the work that the only way to preserve what they had built was to move it. And the people believed, like, they were doing the work, they believed him. They were already doing it because the people doing the work had no reason not to believe him. He had built the thing they are now defending. His judgment had been right before. Why would it be wrong now? So she got on that plane on January 16th, 1978. She had been a member of the People's Temple for somewhere between 3 and 4 years, and she had given up her job, her apartment, most of her money. She had given up most of her social life outside of the church. She had not given up her sisters, and she had not given up Lore, LOR. Those she kept. And she got on the plane. because she thought she was going to the place where the work was being done at the largest scale. She thought she was going to the promised land. She was going to a clearing in the jungle where in 10 months she'd be lying in a field. But she does not know that yet. She would have not known that yet. And anyone who tells you they would have known, I would like you to introduce them to Carolyn Layton, Moore, Christine Miller, Laurie Efrein, and Edith Roller, and the 400 other educated, articulate, politically conscious adults who were on that flight manifest. And I would like to ask them to please explain to me with a straight face how they could have been smarter than all 5 of those women. You wouldn't have been. You could not have been. I would not have been. And that is the point of this episode. So here's where we are. We have a 60-year-old woman in San Francisco in 1975 on a bus on a Sunday morning on her way to a church that she has been told about by a friend. She's going because the church runs care homes. She's going because the church is integrated. She's going because the church is doing what she had been waiting 40 years for someone to do. And she's going to walk in and mama's going to love it. She's going to sign up and she's going to spend the next 2.5 years giving more and more of herself to it. And she's going to get on a plane and she's going to die in a field. And I have spent this entire episode telling you that she was not stupid for any of that and that the church was not a lie and that the help was real. So if she was not stupid and the church was not a lie and the help was real, then what was the help? What was she watching? What was being delivered? So next time on this series, we're going to make the list, the whole list, every single thing the People's Temple actually did for actual people in the Bay Area between 1965 1976, and we're going to read the licenses. We're going to read the addresses. We're going to read the name of the residents. We're going to read the name of the kids on the scholarships. We're going to read the names of the men who got off heroin. We're going to read the names of the grandmothers who got rides to dialysis. We're going to read the entire ledger of what the actual help was, because until we read it, we can't understand any of this. Until we read it, you're going to keep thinking cult and brainwashing, and how could anyone fall for that? And I would have known. And after we read it, I think you're going to stop thinking those things if you are and start thinking, oh God, I would have signed up too. So that'll be part 4, the help. Here's the thing I want to say about part 4 that I probably want you to brace for. In part 4, I'm not going to say a single bad thing about the People's Temple. Not one. I'm going to spend the entire episode telling you what the heck they did right. I'm going to spend the entire episode telling you what they delivered. I'm going to spend the entire episode making the case for them the way their own pamphlets made the case for them, the way their own members made the case for them, the way Edith Roller in her journal in 1975 made the case for them. I'm going to be their lawyer, okay? Fake lawyer. And I'm going to be the best fake lawyer they ever had. And then in part 5, we're going to meet Marceline Baldwin Jones, the woman whose name was on every single one of those licenses. And we're going to ask the question, how did she hold all this together? And what did it cost her? And what did the man who married her do in the process? And in part 6, I'm going to look at the pyramid. And then in part 7, we're going to look at the man. But not yet. Tonight, I hope you sleep with Edith on the bus going across town in 1975 in San Francisco on her way to the church for the first time, with her purse in her lap and her glasses on her nose and her dark hair going gray, and her sisters back in Colorado. Her friend Laura across the bay, LOR, and her job at Betchel waiting for her on Monday, and her whole life on the table. She did not know what was going to happen. She thought she was going to church. Hold her. She had no idea.